A toast, my wife said, to the loser who signs the checks but will never be my real lover. After I'd loved and provided for her for 15 years, I calmly placed a key on the table. Her father saw it, read the note attached, and his face went ash white. Rose, tell me you didn't. Look, I've been to a lot of parties in my life. Birthday parties where someone's drunk aunt decides to tell everyone about her colonoscopy. Retirement parties where grown men cry into their cheap whiskey about the good old days that weren't actually that good. Wedding receptions where the best man's speech goes so far off the rails you'd think he was gunning for a Netflix special. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment my wife of 15 years stood up at our anniversary party, champagne flute raised high like the Statue of Liberty's classless cousin, and decided to roast me like I was a marshmallow at a sadistic summer camp. To the loser who signs the checks, but will never be my real lover, Rose announced, her voice carrying across the entire ballroom with the kind of projection that would make Broadway directors weep with envy. The crystal chandelier above us seemed to dim slightly, like even it was embarrassed to witness this train wreck. 80 people. 80 goddamn people were packed into that room, dressed in their finest cocktail attire, holding their fancy drinks with their pinkies out, and every single one of them heard it. The toast that would go down in infamy. The toast that would be whispered about at country clubs for years to come. The toast that made me wish I'd taken up heavy drinking as a hobby instead of just as an occasional weekend activity. The reaction was immediate and visceral. There was this collective gasp that rippled through the crowd like a wave at a baseball game. Except instead of joy and team spirit, it was pure shock and second-hand embarrassment. Then came the nervous laughter. You know the kind, that weird uncertain chuckle people make when they don't know if something is a joke or if they're witnessing an actual crime being committed. Her girlfriends, though? Oh, those harpies didn't bother with nervous laughter. They straight up snickered, covering their mouths with their manicured hands like they were back in high school, standing around their lockers, watching some poor freshman get pantsed in the hallway. They were reliving their glory days, and apparently, I was the entertainment. Meanwhile, there I sat. Her fiancé. Oh wait, scratch that. Her husband. Me. The guy who'd spent 15 years of his life with this woman. The guy who'd held her hair back when she had food poisoning from that sketchy sushi place she insisted was authentic. The guy who'd listened to her complain about her mother for hours on end, nodding sympathetically while secretly wondering if I could fake my own death and start over in Peru. I just sat there, blinking like an idiot who'd accidentally clicked on the wrong Zoom meeting and was now stuck in someone else's corporate nightmare. My brain was doing that thing where it completely short circuits, like when your computer freezes and you can't even move the mouse cursor. Did she really just say that? Did that actually happen? Am I having a stroke? You'd think this would be the part where I lose my mind, right? The part where I stand up, flip the entire table over like some kind of action movie hero, send the centerpieces flying, watch the china shatter against the marble floor, and storm out while shouting something memorable and badass. You'd think I'd grab the microphone and deliver a devastating counter roast that would make her cry mascara tears into her expensive champagne. You'd think I'd at least throw a dinner roll at her head. But nope. None of that happened. Because here's the thing about being blindsided by public humiliation. Your body goes into this weird autopilot mode where you become unnaturally calm. It's like your brain decides that since you're already in hell, you might as well be polite about it. So instead of causing a scene, I calmly reached into my jacket pocket. Slowly. Deliberately. Like I was reaching for a pack of gum or maybe some breath mints. And I pulled out a small brass key. Nothing fancy, just a regular old key. But this one had a little tag attached to it with 2 characters and a letter, 23C. I placed it on the white tablecloth, right there next to the creme brulee that nobody had touched yet because we were too busy watching my marriage implode in real time. The key made a small clink as it hit the plate. Such a tiny sound. But in that moment of silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. Rose was still standing there, basking in her moment of glory, probably thinking she'd delivered the mic drop of the century. She had this smug little smile on her face, the kind of expression that said she thought she'd won something. Her girlfriends were still giggling, probably already planning how they'd retell this story at their next book club meeting that never actually discussed books. But then I noticed something change. Her father, Richard, had been clapping along with everyone else. That polite, uncomfortable clapping people do when they don't know what else to do with their hands. But his clapping stopped. Just froze mid-air, hands suspended like he'd been paused by a remote control. I watched as Richard's eyes landed on that brass key. Then on the small note I'd attached to it. His face, which had been flushed with expensive wine and second-hand embarrassment just seconds ago, started to drain of color. Like someone had opened a valve at the bottom of his skull and all the blood was rushing out. He went from rosy-cheeked country club dad to ghost white in about 3 seconds flat. It was actually kind of impressive from a medical standpoint. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air on a dock. His hand reached out toward the key, trembling slightly, but he didn't pick it up. He just stared at it like it might explode. Then he croaked. And I mean literally croaked. His voice came out all strangled and desperate. "Rose. Tell me you didn't." 4 words. That's all he managed. But those 4 words carried the weight of a man who suddenly realized his daughter had just screwed up in a way that couldn't be fixed with money or connections or a phone call to his lawyer buddy who owed him a favor. Those 4 words contained the dawning horror of a father who'd just watched his carefully constructed empire start to crumble because his daughter couldn't keep her mouth shut for one goddamn evening. Rose's smile faltered. Just a little bit. A crack in the facade. She looked at her father, then at the key, then back at me. For the first time that evening, I saw something flicker behind her eyes that might have been concern. Might have been fear. Might have been the first glimmer of understanding that she'd just made a catastrophic mistake. But it was too late. Way too late. The key was on the table. The note was visible. And her father looked like he was about to have a heart attack into his lobster bisque. The thing about revenge is that people always expect it to be loud and dramatic. They expect shouting and threats and maybe some light property damage. But the best revenge? The kind that really sticks? It's quiet. It's calculated. It's a brass key placed on a table next to dessert while 80 people watch in confused silence. It's the look on your father-in-law's face when he realizes that his son-in-law isn't the pushover he thought he was. It's the moment when everyone in that room understands that something significant just happened, even if they don't quite know what yet. Vault 23C. 2 numbers and a letter. Such a simple combination. But sometimes the simplest things carry the most weight. And as I sat there, watching Richard's face cycle through several stages of panic, watching Rose's confidence start to waver, watching her girlfriend slowly stop laughing as they sensed the shift in energy, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Calm. The serene satisfaction of a man who'd just played his hand perfectly. They wanted a toast? Well, they got one. They wanted drama? Oh, honey, the show was just getting started. And the best part? I hadn't said a single word. So there's Rose, still standing at the head of the table like she's waiting for a standing ovation that's never going to come, and her father sitting there looking like someone just told him his entire stock portfolio invested in Enron circa 2001. The room's got this weird energy now, like everyone simultaneously wants to leave, but also can't look away from the disaster unfolding in front of them. It's the same energy you get when you pass a car accident on the highway. You know you shouldn't stare, but damn if you're not slowing down to get a better look. Me? I was done. Completely and utterly done. Not in the dramatic, I'm storming out of here and slamming every door I can find kind of way, but in the I've got better things to do than watch this circus continue kind of way. I pushed my chair back from the table, and let me tell you, even that simple action felt loaded with meaning. The chair legs made this polite little scuffing sound against the marble floor, not loud enough to draw attention, not dramatic enough to seem like I was making a statement, just enough to signal that I was checking out of this nightmare. I wasn't about to give these people the satisfaction of seeing me lose my cool. This wasn't Jerry Springer. This wasn't Maury Povich. This wasn't some trashy reality show where people throw drinks and flip tables while dramatic music plays in the background. I stood up slowly, adjusted my jacket, because even in moments of personal catastrophe, there's something to be said for maintaining your dignity, and started walking. Just walking. 1 foot in front of the other, like a man who had somewhere to be that wasn't this godforsaken anniversary party from hell. I walked past the dessert trays that were still fully stocked because everyone had been too busy watching my public humiliation to eat the overpriced petit fours. I walked past the chocolate fountain that Rose had insisted we needed, even though I'd argued that chocolate fountains were tacky and reminded me of middle school dances. Guess who was right about that? I walked past the ice sculpture of 2 swans forming a heart, because apparently, nothing says lasting love like frozen water that's going to melt into a puddle by midnight. Then I passed Uncle Jerry, Rose's mother's brother, who was 3 sheets to the wind and trying to casually pocket wine bottles like he was at some kind of all-you-can-steal buffet. He had this red bottle of what was probably a $200 Cabernet halfway into his sport coat, looking around nervously to see if anyone noticed. I noticed Jerry. I noticed, and honestly, good for you. Take the wine. Take all the wine. Take the whole damn bar if you want. I paid for it anyway, so someone might as well enjoy it. At least Jerry had the decency to be stealing from me instead of publicly humiliating me. That's the kind of integrity I can respect. I made it to the front entrance where the valet was stationed, a kid who couldn't have been more than 22, wearing a vest that was 2 sizes too big for him and a bow tie that looked like it was slowly strangling him. He saw me coming and immediately perked up, probably grateful to have something to do besides stand there and pretend he hadn't heard my wife call me a loser in front of God and everybody. He gave me this big, oblivious smile and waved cheerfully. "Car, sir?" he asked, already reaching for his little clipboard where he'd written down what vehicle belonged to which guest. I stopped and looked at him, really looked at him. This poor kid had no idea what had just happened inside. He was just doing his job. Being polite. Trying to earn his tips for the night. Part of me envied him. Part of me wanted to be him. Someone who could exist on the periphery of this disaster without actually being caught in the blast radius. "No, thanks," I said, and I couldn't help the bitter little smile that crept onto my face. I like a long walk after being publicly castrated. The kid's smile froze, his eyes went wide. He had no idea how to respond to that, and honestly I didn't blame him. That's not the kind of thing they cover in valet training, how to handle drunk guests. Sure, what to do if someone vomits on their own shoes? Absolutely. How to respond when a guest makes a joke about his marriage imploding. Yeah, that's not in the manual. He just stood there, mouth slightly open, clipboard hanging limply at his side. I laughed. A short, sharp bark of laughter that probably sounded a little unhinged. He didn't laugh with me. But I did. Because at this point, what else was there to do? I started walking down the hill, leaving the venue behind me. The event space was one of those places that rich people rent out when they want to show off. All stone columns and ivy-covered walls and those fancy uplights that make everything look like it belongs in a home decorating magazine. It sat on top of a hill overlooking the valley, and the driveway curved down through perfectly manicured gardens with those little solar lights lining the path. Very picturesque. Very romantic. Very this is where fairy tales come true. Except my fairy tale had turned into a horror story somewhere around the part where Rose decided I was an acceptable target for public mockery. The cool evening air hit my face as I walked, and I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs. It felt good, clean, like I was breathing for the first time in hours, maybe years. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in those ridiculous shades of orange and pink that look fake but aren't. Nature was putting on a show, completely indifferent to the personal drama of one middle-aged man whose wife just torched their marriage for a laugh. There was something comforting about that. The world kept spinning. The sun kept setting. Life went on, whether you were having the worst night of your life or not. At the bottom of the hill, right where the fancy driveway met the regular road where regular people drove their regular cars, my truck waited. Beautiful, reliable, unpretentious truck. A Ford F-150, dark blue, with just enough mud on the tires to show it actually got used for real work instead of sitting in a garage as a status symbol. Rose had always hated that truck. She'd wanted me to buy something more sophisticated. A BMW. A Mercedes. Something that screamed, "I have money and I need you to know it." But I kept the truck. Partly because it was practical. Partly because it annoyed her. And partly because sometimes you need something in your life that's just yours, that hasn't been touched, or influenced or criticized by anyone else. I stopped when I reached it, running my hand along the cool metal of the tailgate. And then I smiled. Really smiled, for the first time all night. Because I noticed something I'd been waiting to notice, something I'd planned months ago. The license plate. It ended in 23C. The same combination as the vault key I'd just left on the table next to the creme brulee. The same vault key that had made Richard's face drain of color like someone had pulled the plug on his soul. The same vault key that represented the culmination of months of careful planning and preparation. Was it poetic? Maybe. Was it petty? Absolutely. Did I care? Not even a little bit. Some people might call it excessive, matching your license plate to your revenge scheme. Those people would probably be right. But here's the thing about being systematically disrespected for 15 years. You earn the right to be a little extra when you finally decide to do something about it. You earn the right to have matching license plates and vault keys. You earn the right to plan your exit strategy with the kind of attention to detail usually reserved for military operations or really complicated heists. I pulled my keys from my pocket, the regular keys, not the brass vault key that was currently causing panic attacks at my anniversary party, and unlocked the truck. The interior smelled like coffee and leather and that particular scent of controlled chaos that comes from actually using your vehicle for things other than commuting to brunch. I climbed in behind the wheel, adjusted the rearview mirror, and sat there for a moment in the gathering darkness. Up the hill, I could see the lights from the venue, warm and inviting, like nothing was wrong. I could imagine Rose up there, probably still trying to figure out what the hell just happened, her father probably having some kind of breakdown, her mother probably demanding explanations nobody could give her yet. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine rumbled to life with that satisfying growl that only a well-maintained truck engine can produce. I put it in drive, checked my mirrors like a responsible adult, and pulled away from the curb. No squealing tires. No dramatic acceleration. Just a man driving away from a party that he'd technically thrown for himself, heading toward a future that suddenly looked a whole lot more interesting than his past. As I drove, I glanced one more time in the rearview mirror at the receding lights of the venue. Goodbye, Rose. Goodbye, fancy parties. Goodbye, 15 years of settling for less than I deserved. Hello, Vault 23C. Hello, paperwork. Hello, sweet, calculated revenge. Call it poetic. Call it petty. I called it paperwork. And I was going to enjoy every single signature. So while Rose and her gaggle of mean girls were probably still back at the party, cackling about how I needed to grow a pair, and patting themselves on the back for being so edgy and brave, I was 80 miles away at the Lakeside Motel. Room 6, to be exact. And let me tell you, the Lakeside Motel was not winning any awards for luxury accommodations anytime soon. This place made a Motel 6 look like the Ritz-Carlton. But it had three things going for it. It was cheap, it was far away from Rose and her circus, and most importantly, nobody there gave a damn about who I was or what kind of night I'd had. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect from a place called the Lakeside Motel that charged $49 a night. The carpet was that industrial brown color that's specifically designed to hide decades of stains you don't want to think about. The bedspread had a pattern that could only be described as aggressively floral in shades of orange and brown that hadn't been fashionable since 1978. There was a TV bolted to the dresser, because apparently, TV theft was a serious concern here, and it got about 7 channels if you held your mouth right and stood on one leg. The bathroom was roughly the size of a phone booth, with a shower that had exactly 2 water pressure settings, disappointing trickle or fire hose trying to remove your top layer of skin. But the real charm of room 6 was the view, and I'm using the word charm very loosely here. The window looked out onto what the motel optimistically called a lake, but which was really more of a large pond that had delusions of grandeur. Half of it was frozen over because it was late October and apparently this particular body of water didn't get the memo about staying liquid year-round. Around the edges were these sad-looking reeds, brown and dried, out, sticking up through the ice like nature's version of a bad hair day. Very romantic. Very scenic. Very this is where dreams come to die. But honestly, after the evening I'd had, those half-frozen reeds were a significant upgrade from crystal chandeliers and ice sculptures. The heater in the corner rattled like it was trying to communicate in Morse code, or possibly like it was harboring the ghost of a very angry raccoon. Every few minutes, it would wheeze, clank, and emit a burning smell that made me wonder if I should be concerned about carbon monoxide poisoning. But it did produce heat, sort of, and that was good enough for me. I wasn't here for ambience. I wasn't here for a good night's sleep. I was here because sometimes when your life implodes at a fancy party, you need to regroup somewhere that nobody would ever think to look for you. I dropped my keys on the nightstand, which wobbled because one leg was shorter than the others, naturally, and sat down on the bed. The springs creaked ominously, like they were debating whether or not they could support my weight. I hadn't brought much with me. No overnight bag packed with toiletries and a change of clothes like I was planning some kind of getaway. No rifles or weapons or anything that would make this look like the opening scene of a crime drama where the wronged husband goes off the deep end. Just one thing. A black leather briefcase that looked completely out of place in this dump of a motel room. I set the briefcase on the bed next to me and clicked it open. Inside were 3 folders, each one labeled with neat, professional tabs that screamed, "I've been planning this for a while and I'm not messing around." The first folder, Plan A Divorce. Clean, simple, straightforward. All the paperwork already drawn up, already reviewed, already notarized. Just needed signatures. The second folder, Plan B, Eviction. Because apparently, when you systematically disrespect someone for 15 years, you don't get to keep living in the house they bought. And the third folder, my personal favorite, Plan C, Nuclear. I hadn't opened that one yet. I was saving it. Like a fine wine or a really good piece of chocolate, some things are meant to be savored at just the right moment. I pulled out my phone, which had been buzzing intermittently with texts and calls that I'd been gleefully ignoring, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Ms. Harriet Healy, Esquire. Estate lawyer extraordinaire. The woman who'd helped me set all of this up, who'd listened to my ideas that probably sounded insane at first, and who'd simply nodded and said, "I can work with that." I loved Ms. Healy. Not in a romantic way. The woman was 73 years old and happily married to her wife of 40 years. But I loved her in the way you love someone who sees you at your most vindictive, and doesn't judge, just takes notes. I hit the call button. It rang twice before she picked up. I was wondering when you'd call, she said, no preamble, no small talk. That was another thing I loved about Ms. Healy. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I take it the toast happened? Oh, it happened, I said, leaning back against the headboard, which immediately protested with a loud crack that made me wonder if I was about to end up on the floor. She called me a loser who signs the checks but will never be her real lover. In front of 80 people, including her father, there was a pause. Then Ms. Healy made this sound that was half laugh, half snort. Well, that's certainly grounds for activating the clause. Did you leave the key? Left it right next to the creme brulee? I confirmed. Richard looked like he was about to have a stroke. It was beautiful. I bet it was, Ms. Healy said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. So we're doing this? We're really doing this. Activate 23C. I said calmly, firmly, like I was ordering coffee instead of triggering a carefully orchestrated plan that would dismantle my wife's entire life. And start the timeline. She didn't ask why. That was the thing about lawyers like Ms. Healy. The really good ones. The ones who'd been practicing law since before I was born, the ones who'd seen every flavor of human drama and dysfunction. They didn't need backstories. They didn't need explanations or justifications or long speeches about hurt feelings and broken trust. They just needed signatures. They needed facts. They needed dates and times and notarized documents. The emotional stuff? That was my problem. Her job was to make sure everything was legal, ironclad, and absolutely bulletproof. I'll file the paperwork first thing Monday morning, she said, all business now. The timeline we discussed puts us at full execution within 45 days, assuming no complications. Though I have to tell you, I've never seen a prenup with a clause quite like this one. It's either genius or insane. Maybe both. Both, I agreed. Definitely both. You know she's going to fight this, Ms. Healy warned. She's going to hire lawyers. Expensive ones. They're going to try to argue that you coerced her into signing, that she didn't understand what she was agreeing to, that the clause is unconscionable. Let them try, I said. You've got 14 months of preparation on your side. You've documented everything. And she signed that prenup while watching a YouTube video about decorating mantles. We've got the browser history to prove it. Ms. Healy laughed, a full belly laugh that made me smile despite everything. You know what? I've been practicing law for 47 years. I've handled divorces, estates, trusts, you name it. And this? This is going to be the most satisfying case I've worked on in decades. Not because of the money, though the billable hours are nice, but because sometimes, just sometimes, you get to help someone who actually deserves help. We talked for another few minutes, going over details, confirming timelines, making sure all the pieces were in place. Ms. Healy had been prepping this for 14 months. 14 months of careful planning, strategic document filing, quiet meetings in her office where we'd gone over every possible scenario. She was like Batman, if Batman wore sensible pantsuits and had a law degree from Yale instead of a cape and a tragic backstory. Well, okay, I guess I had kind of a tragic backstory now. But Ms. Healy had the legal expertise, and that was what mattered. When we hung up, I sat there in the dim light of room 6, listening to the heater rattle and wheeze, looking out at the half-frozen lake with its sad reeds. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Rose. I didn't even bother to read it. I just turned the phone face down on the nightstand and let it buzz into oblivion. She could text all she wanted. She could call until her fingers fell off. It didn't matter anymore. The wheels were in motion. The paperwork was being filed. The timeline was activated. I looked at the 3 folders spread out on the bed next to me. Plan A, Plan B, Plan C. 15 years of marriage, reduced to 3 folders in a leather briefcase in a motel room that smelled faintly of mildew and broken dreams. But you know what? I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd been carrying around a massive weight and had finally set it down. The Lakeside Motel, room 6, with its rattling heater and disappointing view, had better Wi-Fi than my marriage ever had. And tomorrow, when Rose woke up and started to realize that the key I'd left wasn't just a dramatic gesture, but the first domino in a very long chain. Well, that was going to be one hell of a show. I stretched out on the bed, ignoring the protesting springs, and closed my eyes. For the first time in 15 years, I slept like a baby. Let me take you back 2 years. 2 whole years before the toast heard round the room. Before the brass key and the creme brulee. Before Richard's face went the color of printer paper and Rose's world started its slow-motion collapse. 2 years before I became the guy sleeping in a motel room with half-frozen reeds as his view. Back when I still had hope. Or maybe delusion. The line between those two things gets pretty blurry when you're married to someone like Rose. It was a Tuesday afternoon, which is already a suspect day of the week if you ask me. Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. Mondays you expect to be terrible, so at least you're prepared. Wednesdays you're halfway through and can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But Tuesdays? Tuesdays are just there, lurking, waiting to mess with you when you least expect it. Rose and I were sitting in our home office. Well, sitting is generous. I was sitting at the desk, trying to handle some paperwork for our estate planning. Rose was perched on the leather couch across the room, phone in hand, completely absorbed in whatever fresh hell the internet was offering up that day. "Babe, I need you to sign these," I'd said, gesturing to the stack of documents Ms. Healy had prepared. Estate planning stuff. Boring adult things like wills and trusts and asset distribution. The kind of paperwork that makes your eyes glaze over and your brain shut down in self-defense. It's just updating our beneficiary information and some trust fund stuff. Routine legal housekeeping. Rose had mumbled, not even looking up from her phone. Her thumb was scrolling at lightning speed. That universal gesture of someone who's physically present but mentally checked out to another dimension. I could see the reflection of her screen in the window behind her. Pinterest. Of course it was Pinterest. The website where dreams of perfect homes and perfect lives went to taunt regular people with their inadequacy. Rose. I tried again. This is kind of important. We need to get these notarized by Friday. Yeah. Just put them on the coffee table. I'll sign them. She said, waving her free hand vaguely in my direction without breaking eye contact with her phone. On the screen, I could see she was looking at pictures of mantles. Fireplace mantles. Decorated with what appeared to be fake hydrangeas in various shades of purple and white, arranged in distressed metal buckets that probably cost more than a car payment. Do you think we should redecorate the living room mantle? I'm thinking a more rustic farmhouse vibe. These hydrangeas are gorgeous. I stared at her for a long moment. Here I was, trying to handle serious legal documents that would determine what happened to everything we owned, and she was concerned about fake flowers. Fake flowers. Not even real ones that would die and need replacing, but synthetic ones that would sit there gathering dust while pretending to be alive. It was almost poetic, in a depressing kind of way. Kind of like our marriage, now that I think about it. Sure, honey, I said, because at that point, what else was I going to say? I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with Rose about her decorating else was I going to say? I'd learned a long time ago that arguing with Rose about her decorating obsessions was like trying to stop the tide with a spoon. Futile and exhausting. Hydrangeas sound great. But seriously, can you please sign these? Miss Healy needs them back. Fine. Rose sighed dramatically, like I was asking her to donate a kidney instead of just putting her signature on some legal documents. She finally looked up from her phone, set it down on the couch cushion next to her with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts, and stood up. She walked over to the coffee table where I'd laid out the documents, all neatly flagged with those little yellow sign here tabs that lawyers love so much. Now, here's where it gets interesting. See, I've been working with Ms. Healy on these documents for about 3 months at that point. 3 months of careful planning, strategic wording, and what Ms. Healy called protective measures. The bulk of it was standard estate planning stuff. Genuinely boring legal language about trusts and distributions and tax implications. The kind of stuff that would make a normal person's brain melt out of their ears. But buried in there, on page 47 of a 63-page document, was a little something special. Something Ms. Healy and I had crafted with the precision of Swiss watchmakers and the vindictiveness of scorned poets. Clause 19b. Innocuous little number. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. And Rose, bless her heart, was never paying attention. The clause read, in very official legal language that took 3 paragraphs to say what could have been said in 1 sentence. In the event that either party engages in public acts of humiliation, degradation, or deliberate disrespect toward the other party in a social setting with witnesses numbering 10 or more persons, said behavior shall constitute grounds for immediate nullification of inheritance rights, asset claims, and spousal benefits as outlined in sections 12 through 18 of this agreement. Translated into normal human language. If you publicly humiliate me in front of a crowd, you lose everything. Your inheritance. Your claim to our shared assets. Your spousal benefits. All of it. Gone. Poof. Like it never existed. It was beautiful. It was diabolical. It was probably the most satisfying paragraph I'd ever had a hand in writing. The best part? The absolute cherry on top of this revenge sundae. The clause didn't require cheating. Didn't require theft. Didn't require criminal activity or violence or any of the usual suspects that tank marriages. Just disrespect. Public disrespect. The kind of casual cruelty that Rose had been dishing out in small doses for years, that I'd been swallowing and ignoring and pretending didn't hurt. All it took was one big public moment of humiliation, and the trap would spring. Ms. Healy had questioned whether it would hold up in court. "It's creative," she'd said, adjusting her glasses and studying the language we'd crafted. "Very creative, but also potentially challengeable. A good lawyer might argue it's too subjective. What constitutes humiliation? Who decides if something crosses the line? That's why we need to be specific," I'd told her. "We need measurable criteria: number of witnesses, public setting, clear intent to demean or disrespect, number of witnesses, public setting, clear intent to demean or disrespect. And we document everything. Every snide comment she makes in front of people. Every little jab. Build a pattern. So when the big one happens, and it will happen, trust me, we have evidence that this wasn't a one-time thing. This was a pattern of behavior." Miss Healy had smiled at that. A thin, professional smile that told me she'd seen her share of marriages held together by spite and habit. "You're either very smart or very paranoid," she'd said. "Can I be both?" I'd replied. So there was Rose, standing at the coffee table, pen in hand, speed reading through 63 pages of legal documentation like she was trying to set a world record. Except she wasn't really reading. She was skimming. Barely even that. Her eyes were glazing over at all the heretofore and notwithstanding and party of the first part, nonsense that lawyers use to make sure nobody actually understands what they're signing. Every few pages, she'd flip to a yellow tab, scribble her signature, which had gotten progressively sloppier over the years I noticed, and move on to the next one. "This is so boring," she complained about halfway through the stack. "Why do lawyers have to use so many words? Can't they just say things like normal people?" "It's to protect us," I said, mild, watching her sign page after page without reading a single word. "Make sure everything's legal and binding." "Yeah, well, it's still boring," she muttered. She was on page 46 now. One more page until clause 19b. I felt my heart rate pick up slightly, though I kept my face completely neutral. This was it. The moment of truth. Would she actually read it? Would something catch her eye? Would she ask questions? Page 47. She flipped to it, found the yellow tab marking her signature line at the bottom, and signed. Just like that. No hesitation. No reading. No questions. Her signature, Rose M. Patterson, looped across the line in blue ink, legally binding her to terms she didn't even know existed. It was almost too easy. Almost anticlimactic. I built this up in my head as this huge moment, and she just breezed right through it while thinking about fake flowers. "There," she said, signing the last page with a flourish and dropping the pen on the table. "Done. Happy now? Can I get back to my mantles?" "Very happy," I said, gathering up the documents carefully, making sure not to smudge any of the fresh ink. "Thank you, honey. I'll get these to Ms. Healy tomorrow." Rose was already back on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through more pictures of farmhouse decor. "We should definitely get those hydrangeas," she said absently, "and maybe some of those distressed metal buckets. Very on trend right now." "Sure, babe," I said, sliding the documents into a folder, then into my briefcase. "Whatever makes you happy." And that was it. That was the moment that sealed her fate, 2 years before she'd stand up at our anniversary party and call me a loser in front of 80 people. She'd signed away her future while shopping for home decor. She'd triggered her own trap while watching a video on how to arrange fake flowers in rustic containers. She'd played herself, as the kids say, and she didn't even know it. I took those documents to Ms. Healy the next day. She notarized them, filed them, and locked them away in her safe. "Well," she'd said, stamping the final page with her official seal. "That's that. Let's hope you never have to use this." "Let's hope," I'd agreed. But even then, 2 years before the toast, I knew better. I knew Rose. I knew her casual cruelty, her need to be the center of attention, her complete lack of awareness about how her words affected other people. It wasn't a matter of if she'd crossed the line. It was when. And I'd be ready. Clause 19b would be waiting, patient as a landmine, for the moment she finally went too far. Classic Rose indeed. She'd signed her own divorce papers while deciding between purple and white hydrangeas. You couldn't make this stuff up if you tried. Meanwhile, back at the party, because of course this story needs to cut back to the scene of the crime like some kind of revenge thriller, Richard Patterson was having what medical professionals would probably classify as a significant cardiovascular event. Not a full heart attack, mind you, but definitely in the neighborhood. His hands were shaking. His collar suddenly felt too tight. And that brass key sitting on the table next to the untouched creme brulee was staring at him like it contained the secrets of the universe. Or at least the secrets of his imminent financial doom. Now, Richard Patterson was not a stupid man. You don't build a successful commercial real estate empire by being stupid. You don't navigate decades of cutthroat business deals and shady contractors and zoning board meetings by being an idiot. Richard knew things. He understood leverage. He recognized power plays. And he absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, knew that a brass key appearing at the exact moment his daughter publicly humiliated her husband was not a coincidence. This wasn't some random key that fell out of my pocket. This was a message. A very specific, very deliberate message that made his blood pressure spike like he'd just mainlined espresso. The thing about Richard was that he'd always underestimated me. Always. From the moment Rose brought me home to meet the family 15 years ago, he'd sized me up and found me adequate. Not impressive. Not remarkable. Just adequate. A decent enough guy with a decent enough job who'd probably treat his daughter decently. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't from old money. I didn't golf at the country club or sail yachts or do any of the things that Richard's social circle considered markers of success. I was just some regular guy who happened to fall in love with his daughter, and Richard had tolerated me the way you tolerate a mid-range sedan. It gets you where you need to go, but you're not going to brag about it at parties. What Richard didn't know, what nobody knew, really, was that adequate can be a very effective disguise. While everyone was busy underestimating the quiet guy in the corner who didn't make waves, the quiet guy was paying attention, taking notes, planning. And right now, Richard was starting to suspect that maybe, just maybe, he'd miscalculated. The party was still going, sort of. The energy had shifted from elegant anniversary celebration to did we really just witness that in record time. Guests were clustering in small groups, whispering behind their champagne flutes, trying to figure out if they should leave or stay or pretend nothing happened. Rose was still standing at the head table, looking confused and slightly annoyed that her big moment hadn't landed the way she expected. Her friends were around her, probably telling her she was brave and stunning and whatever other nonsense mean girls tell each other when they've collectively crossed a line. But Richard wasn't paying attention to any of that. His entire world had narrowed down to that key and the small note attached to it. His fingers were trembling as he reached for it. And I wish I could have been there to see it. I wish I could have watched in real time as he picked up that key, felt its weight in his palm, and read the note I'd so carefully prepared. The note that said, in my handwriting, Vault 23C. First National Bank, Downtown Branch. You might want to check this before Monday. Before Monday. That was the kicker. That was the part that would send him into panic mode. Because Richard Patterson was a businessman and businessmen understand deadlines. They understand that before Monday means you have approximately 36 hours to fix whatever catastrophe is about to happen. It means the clock is ticking. It means someone has made a move and you're already behind. Richard stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and clattered against the marble floor. Nobody noticed except his wife, Eleanor, who grabbed his arm with perfectly manicured nails and hissed. Richard. What's wrong? You look terrible. I need to go, Richard said, his voice tight and strangled. He wasn't even trying to be discreet anymore. I need to go right now. Go? Richard, we're at our daughter's anniversary party. You can't just leave. Watch me, Richard said, shaking off her hand and shoving the key into his pocket like it was radioactive. He looked around the room wildly, spotted Rose still holding court with her friends, and made a beeline for the exit. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just a 62-year-old man in a custom suit practically running through a ballroom full of confused guests while his wife called after him in increasingly shrill tones. Richard made it to his car, a silver Mercedes S-Class that cost more than most people's houses, in under 2 minutes. His driver, Carlos, was leaning against the hood smoking a cigarette and scrolling through his phone, expecting to be there for at least another 2 hours. He looked up in surprise as Richard came barreling toward him like a man being chased by bees. Keys, Richard barked. Give me the keys. I'm driving. Carlos blinked. In the 8 years he'd worked for Richard Patterson, the man had never once driven himself when Carlos was on duty. Sir, is everything? Keys. Now, Carlos handed over the keys, and Richard practically dove into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and he peeled out of the parking lot with a screech of tires that definitely violated the maintain elegance at all times policy of the venue. He left Carlos standing there in a cloud of exhaust, probably wondering if he still had a job. The drive to First National Bank normally took about 30 minutes. Richard made it in 18, breaking approximately 47 traffic laws in the process. It was Saturday evening, which meant the bank was closed to regular customers, but Richard Patterson wasn't a regular customer. Richard Patterson was a platinum account holder with the kind of balance that meant the bank manager had his personal cell phone number and instructions to be available within reason for emergencies. And if this wasn't an emergency, Richard didn't know what was. He pulled into the bank's parking lot, tires squealing, and sat there for a moment gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. His heart was pounding. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool evening air. And that brass key in his pocket felt like it weighed about 1,000 pounds. Part of him, a very small, very desperate part, wanted to just drive away. Pretend he'd never seen the key. Go back to the party, have another drink, and deal with whatever fresh hell this was on Monday during normal business hours like a sane person. But Richard didn't get where he was by avoiding problems. He got there by confronting them head on. Even when confronting them felt like walking into a minefield wearing clown shoes. He pulled out his phone and dialed Thomas Garrett, the bank manager, whose weekend was about to get a lot more interesting. "Thomas," Richard said when the man picked up, not bothering with pleasantries. "I need access to a safety deposit box. Tonight. Right now." There was a pause. "Mr. Patterson, it's Saturday evening. The vault isn't staffed. I don't care if you have to drive here yourself and open it with a blowtorch." Richard interrupted. "I need to access Vault 23C immediately. This is not a request." Something in Richard's voice must have conveyed the urgency, because Thomas sighed and said, "Give me 40 minutes. It was the longest 40 minutes of Richard Patterson's life. He sat in his Mercedes, watching the sun set behind the downtown buildings, feeling his blood pressure climb with every passing minute. He tried calling me. Straight to voicemail. He tried calling Rose to demand answers. She didn't pick up, probably still at the party, basking in what she thought was her moment of triumph. He even tried calling Eleanor, but she was clearly pissed about him abandoning her at the party and let it go to voicemail after 2 rings. Finally, Thomas pulled up in his sensible Camry, looking rumpled and annoyed in khakis and a polo shirt instead of his usual business attire. "Mr. Patterson," he said, unlocking the bank's front door. "I hope this is genuinely urgent." "Trust me," Richard said grimly. "It is." They walked through the empty bank, their footsteps echoing in the marble lobby. Thomas led him down to the vault room, a secure area lined with safety deposit boxes in various sizes. Box 23C was medium-sized, unremarkable, identical to dozens of others. Thomas used his master key and the brass key Richard provided, and the small door swung open with a quiet click that sounded deafening in the silent vault. Inside were 2 documents. Just 2. No cash. No jewelry. No family heirlooms or stock certificates or any of the things people usually keep in safety deposit boxes. Just 2 pieces of paper, neatly folded, that represented the complete dismantling of everything Richard thought he understood about his son-in-law. Richard pulled them out with shaking hands. The first document was a notarized buyout agreement. My 49% stake in Patterson Commercial Real Estate, the company Richard and I had built together over the past decade, had been sold. Not to a competitor. Not to some random investor. To a charitable foundation. The Delaney Foundation, specifically. Effective immediately upon the triggering of Clause 19B in my prenuptial agreement with Rose. The sale price was listed as $1. $1. For a stake worth approximately $8 million. Richard's vision blurred. He had to lean against the wall of safety deposit boxes to keep from falling over. $8 million, given away for a buck. His company, well, technically our company, but he'd always thought of it as his because he was Richard Patterson and that's how he thought about everything, was now partially owned by some charity he'd never heard of, and there was nothing he could do about it. The document was notarized, dated 2 months ago, legal and binding. With hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, Richard unfolded the second document. It was a will, my will, also notarized, also legal, and it very clearly stated that in the event of my death or legal separation from Rose Patterson, all remaining assets, properties, and holdings would transfer not to my wife, not to her family, but to Marcus Delaney, age 24, veteran, sole beneficiary of the Delaney Foundation. Richard read it twice. Then 3 times. Then once more because his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Who the hell was Marcus Delaney? Why was some random 24-year-old kid inheriting everything? And more importantly, how long had I been planning this? Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly. "Is everything all right, Mr. Patterson?" Richard looked at him. And for the first time in his 62 years, Richard Patterson had absolutely no answer. His face was ash white. His palms were sweating through the expensive paper. And somewhere, probably still at that godforsaken motel with the half-frozen lake, I was sleeping peacefully, knowing that Richard had just discovered exactly how much he'd underestimated the adequate son-in-law. The quiet guy. The one who didn't make waves. The one who'd just made the biggest wave of all. His name was Marcus Delaney, and the first time I met him, I was pretty sure he could snap me in half like a pretzel stick without breaking a sweat. The guy was built like someone had taken a Greek statue, given it a military haircut, and taught it how to stand at attention so perfectly it made my slouched, middle-aged accountant posture look like a question mark having an existential crisis. He was 24 years old, which meant he was young enough to be my son if I'd been a very irresponsible teenager, and he carried himself with the kind of rigid discipline that screamed, "I've seen things that would make civilians cry into their overpriced lattes." Screamed, "I've seen things that would make civilians cry into their overpriced lattes." We met in the conference room of a cheap hotel, not the lakeside motel with its rattling heater and depressing view, but a different cheap hotel about 40 miles south called the Restwell Inn, which was an optimistic name considering the paper-thin walls and the interstate highway that ran about 30 feet from the building. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect from a budget hotel. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige everything, with a long table that had seen better days and chairs that squeaked every time you shifted your weight. There was a whiteboard on one wall with some previous meetings notes still faintly visible, something about Q3 sales projections and increased cold calls. And a coffee station in the corner with one of those industrial brewers that made coffee taste like it had been filtered through a gym sock. I got there first, which was intentional. I wanted to be the one waiting, not the one arriving. It's a small power move, but when you're about to hand over $8 million worth of assets to a stranger, you take whatever power moves you can get. I brought black coffee in a thermos because I didn't trust the hotel's brew, and I was sitting at the head of the table when Marcus walked in at exactly 2 p.m. Not 1.59. Not 2.01. Exactly 2 o'clock, because apparently, the Marine Corps teaches you that being early is on time, being on time is late, and being late is unacceptable. He was wearing his dress uniform, which I hadn't expected but probably should have. Navy blue jacket with more medals and ribbons than I could identify. Khaki shirt underneath, the kind of creases in his pants that looked like they could cut paper. His shoes were so polished I could practically see my reflection in them from across the room. And his posture. God. His posture made me want to apologize to my chiropractor for all the years of slouching. The guy stood like someone had replaced his spine with a steel rod and then told him humanity's survival depended on maintaining perfect alignment. "Mr. Patterson," he said, and even his voice had that military quality, clear, direct, no wasted words. "That's me," I said, standing up and extending my hand. "Though you can call me whatever you want. You're about to inherit my life savings, so formal titles seem kind of silly." He shook my hand. Firm grip. Not the overcompensating crushing grip that insecure men use to prove something, but solid and respectful. "Marcus Delaney, sir," he said, and I noticed he didn't smile. Not in an unfriendly way, just in a way that suggested smiling wasn't his default setting. "I have to admit, I'm confused about why I'm here." "Join the club," I said, gesturing for him to sit. He sat down with the kind of precision that made it look choreographed, back straight, hands folded on the table in front of him. "You want some coffee?" Fair warning, the hotel stuff tastes like despair, but I brought a thermos of the decent stuff. "I'm fine, thank you, sir." "Stop calling me, sir," I said, pouring myself a cup. "You're making me feel ancient. I'm only 42. I've got at least another decade before sir feels appropriate." That got the tiniest hint of a smile, just a slight upward twitch at the corner of his mouth that disappeared almost immediately. Progress. I sat back down and looked at him for a long moment, trying to figure out where to start. How do you explain to a complete stranger that you're giving them everything you own because your wife called you a loser at your anniversary party? How do you condense 15 years of a slowly dying marriage and 2 years of meticulous planning into a conversation that makes any kind of sense? You can't really, but you can try. "Your father saved my life in 2005, I said finally, deciding to start at the beginning. "Did you know that?" Marcus's expression shifted slightly. "Not much, but enough that I could tell the mention of his father hit something." "No, sir," he caught himself. "No, I didn't know that. My father died in 2006. I was 10 years old. I don't know much about what he did before then." "He was a good man," I said, and I meant it. "One of the best men I've ever met, actually. We worked together on a construction project in Denver. I was young, stupid, thought I knew everything about electrical work because I'd read some books and taken some classes. Your father was the foreman, and he knew I was full of crap, but he was patient about it. Didn't humiliate me. Just quietly corrected my mistakes and made sure I learned the right way." I took a sip of coffee, remembering. There was an accident. Faulty wiring that someone else had installed before we got there. I didn't see it. I was about to connect a junction box that would have sent enough electricity through me to turn me into a human sparkler. Your father saw it, tackled me out of the way. We both hit the ground hard, but we were alive. He saved my life, and I never got the chance to thank him properly. 6 months later, I heard he'd died. Heart attack, they said. Way too young. 41 years old. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. He was 41, he confirmed quietly. Dropped dead in the kitchen, making breakfast. My mom found him. I owed him everything, I said. I tried to find your family afterward, tried to help, but you guys had moved and I lost track. Then about 2 years ago, I hired a private investigator. Took him 6 months, but he found you. Marine Corps, 2 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge, currently working as a security consultant. 24 years old and already more accomplished than most people twice your age. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise, which somehow made me like him more. I just did my job, he said. Yeah, well, your job involved getting shot at and diffusing situations that would make normal people wet their pants. So let's not downplay it, I said. Point is, I found you. And I realized I finally had a chance to pay back the debt I owed your father. Not to him directly, obviously. But to you. His son. The person he'd want taken care of. Don't need charity, Marcus said, and there was steel in his voice now. Pride, the kind of pride that comes from making it on your own and not asking for handouts. Good, I said, because this isn't charity, this is a business transaction. I'm not giving you money out of pity or some misguided sense of guilt, I'm giving it to you. Because unlike Rose, that's my wife, soon to be ex-wife. You won't spend it on throw pillows and champagne fountains. That got a real smile out of him. Small, but genuine. I don't even know what a champagne fountain is, he admitted. Consider yourself blessed, I said. It's exactly what it sounds like, and it's exactly as stupid as you're imagining. Cost me $4,000 to rent one for our anniversary party last weekend. You know what happened at that party? Marcus shook his head. My wife stood up in front of 80 people and made a toast, calling me a loser who signs the checks but will never be her real lover, I said flatly. So I left her a key to a safety deposit box and walked out. Her? I said flatly. So I left her a key to a safety deposit box and walked out. That key led to documents showing that everything I own, my share of the business, my assets, all of it, is now going to you instead of her. Because I'd rather give $8 million to a stranger who served his country than to a woman who spent 15 years treating me like a walking ATM with mediocre bedroom skills. Marcus blinked. It was possibly the most emotion I'd seen from him since he walked in. $8 million, he repeated, like he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Give or take, I said, pending some final paperwork, but yeah, 8 million. Maybe a little more, depending on how the business valuation shakes out. Your father saved my life, Marcus. That life earned $8 million. Seems only fair his son gets it instead of my ungrateful wife. There was a long silence. Marcus sat there processing, his face going through a series of micro-expressions too quick for me to fully read. Shock. Confusion. Disbelief. Maybe a little bit of anger, like he suspected this was some kind of elaborate prank. Finally, he spoke. Why me? He asked, his voice rough. Why not donate it to veterans' charities? Why not just burn it if you hate your wife that much? Why give it to some random guy you don't even know? I leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye. Because, Marcus, I said, and I could feel myself smirking despite the serious moment. Unlike Rose, you won't spend it on decorative hydrangeas and rustic metal buckets. Unlike her friends, you probably won't use it to fund your Mean Girls reunion tour. Unlike her family, you'll actually appreciate it instead of treating it like it's your birthright. And unlike every single person who was at that anniversary party laughing while my marriage imploded, you have actual integrity. He laughed then. Actually laughed. It was nervous and uncertain and sounded like it surprised him as much as it surprised me. But it was real. That's insane, he said. Yeah, I agreed. It really is. But so is spending 15 years married to someone who views you as a convenient source of funding. So is paying for your own anniversary party where you get roasted like a Comedy Central special. So is everything about my life for the past decade and a half. Insanity seems pretty on brand at this point. Marcus shook his head, still processing. What do I have to do? He asked finally. Nothing, I said. Just be a better steward of that money than Rose would have been. Which, let's be honest, is an incredibly low bar. You could literally set half of it on fire and still be doing better than she would have. But I'm hoping you'll use it for something good. Start a business. Help other veterans. Buy a house. Invest it. Whatever you want. It's yours. This is crazy, Marcus said again, but I could see something shifting in his expression. Acceptance, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. Welcome to my world, I said, raising my coffee cup in a mock toast. Population. Us, apparently. He shook his hand again. And this time when I shook it, it felt different. Not just a formality, but a real connection. A transfer of trust from one generation to another, from a man who owed a debt to the son of the man who saved him. Marcus Delaney, 24-year-old ex-Marine with posture that made my back hurt just looking at it. Already a better person than 15 years of marriage had produced. Already someone I could respect. Already, definitively, absolutely better than throw pillows and champagne fountains. Back in the city, approximately 72 hours after the toast heard round the room, Rose was having what you might call a come-to-Jesus moment. Except instead of Jesus, it was Greg Morrison, Esquire. And instead of salvation, he was offering her a front row seat to watching her entire life circle the drain. Greg's office was located in one of those downtown buildings that screamed, "We charge by the minute and our water costs more than your lunch." All floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that looked expensive because it was uncomfortable. The kind of place where even the air felt like it had a price tag. Rose stormed in like she was auditioning for a role in a soap opera about wronged women seeking justice. And I mean stormed. No appointment. No phone call ahead. Just barged past Greg's assistant. A 20-something named Jennifer, who looked perpetually exhausted from dealing with entitled clients, and threw open the door to his office hard enough that it bounced off the wall and nearly hit her on the rebound. She was a mess, which was shocking because Rose Patterson did not do mess. Rose Patterson did carefully curated Instagram-worthy outfits and perfect hair and makeup that looked natural but took an hour to achieve. But today? Today Rose looked like she'd gotten dressed in the dark during an earthquake. No lipstick, which was maybe the most alarming thing of all. Rose without lipstick was like a wedding cake without frosting. Technically still functional, but deeply wrong on a fundamental level. No pearls, which she normally wore even to the grocery store because her mother had drilled into her that ladies always accessorize. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail that had given up halfway through, with chunks falling out around her face. She was wearing yoga pants. Rose, who once told me that yoga pants in public were a sign of societal decline, and an oversized sweatshirt that might have been mine at some point. She looked like she'd been crying, which she probably had been, and her eyes had that wild, desperate quality of someone who'd just realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake. "Stop him," she demanded, slamming her hands down on Greg's mahogany desk hard enough to make his coffee cup jump. "You have to stop him. This is insane. This is illegal. There has to be something you can do." Greg, to his credit, didn't even flinch. He'd been practicing family law for 23 years, which meant he'd seen every flavor of marital meltdown known to humanity. Crying spouses? Tuesday morning. Screaming matches in his office? Wednesday afternoon. Someone threatening to set their ex's car on fire? That was last Thursday. Greg had seen it all, heard it all, and developed the kind of unflappable calm that usually only comes from either extensive meditation practice or heavy medication. He set down his pen, folded his hands on his desk, and looked at Rose with the expression of a man who was getting paid $400 an hour to deliver bad news. "Good morning, Rose," he said calmly. "Please, have a seat." "I don't want to sit." Rose shrieked, but then immediately sat down anyway because even in the middle of a breakdown, years of social conditioning about being polite won out. "Greg, he's taking everything. Everything. The house, the business, the accounts. He can't do this. Tell me he can't do this." Greg reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a file. Not just any file, but the file. The one I'd been working on with Ms. Healy for 2 years. The one that contained every carefully worded clause. Every strategic paragraph, every legal landmine I'd planted during those months when Rose was too busy with Pinterest to notice what she was signing. He slid it across the desk toward her, and Rose looked at it like it was a live snake. "Your husband can do this," Greg said, his tone neutral, professional. "In fact, he already has. Everything you're seeing unfold right now is completely legal and binding. You signed the agreements, Rose, multiple times, with witnesses, and notarization. I thought those were home renovation forms." Rose sputtered, and oh man, I wished I could have been there to see Greg's face when she said that. I would have paid money, actual money, to watch him process that statement. Greg raised one eyebrow, which was the lawyer equivalent of screaming, "Are you kidding me?" He opened the file and started flipping through pages, dozens of them, all flagged with those little yellow tabs. "Rose," he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a particularly dense child. "These documents are 63 pages long. They contain words like heretofore, notwithstanding, And party of the first part. They have my letterhead on every page. They were delivered to you by a notary public who watched you sign them and verified your identity. At what point in this process did you think you were agreeing to renovate a bathroom? Rose's face flushed red. I was busy. I was planning the anniversary party. I had a million things on my mind. I didn't have time to read every single word of. That's not how legal documents work, Greg interrupted, and there was the tiniest hint of frustration creeping into his professionally neutral tone. That's not how any of this works. When you sign a legal document, you are certifying that you have read it, understood it, and agree to its terms. Whether you were busy planning a party or watching paint dry is irrelevant. You signed. That's what matters. But I didn't know what I was signing. Rose insisted, her voice getting shrill again. He tricked me. He deliberately gave them to me when I was distracted. That has to count for something. Greg closed the file and leaned back in his expensive leather chair that probably cost more than my truck. Let me ask you something, Rose. When your husband asked you to sign these documents, did he hold a gun to your head? What? No, of course not. Did he threaten you? Coerce you? Force you in any way? No, but did he prevent you from reading the documents? Cover up parts of them? Rush you through the signing? Rose opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. He gave them to me when I was looking at Pinterest, she said weakly like that was some kind of defense. So what you're telling me, Greg said, and I swear I could hear the exhaustion in his voice even though I wasn't there, is that your husband asked you to sign important legal documents, you chose to look at Pinterest instead of reading them, and now you're upset about the consequences. Of your own choices you're supposed to be on my side, Rose practically shouted. I'm not on anyone's side, Greg said firmly. I'm a lawyer. I deal in facts and law, not feelings and sides. And the fact is, you signed a prenuptial agreement with Clause 19b that explicitly states that public acts of humiliation constitute grounds for immediate loss of inheritance rights and asset claims. You then proceeded to publicly humiliate your husband in front of 80 people. You triggered the clause. The dominoes fell. That's the end of the story. Rose's face crumpled. Actual tears started running down her cheeks, smearing what little makeup she had on into gray streaks that made her look like a sad raccoon. There has to be something we can do, she whispered. Some loophole. Some technicality. Anything. Greg sighed, and for a moment, he almost looked sympathetic. Almost. Rose. I've reviewed these documents with 3 other attorneys. They're airtight. Whoever drafted them knew exactly what they were doing. Every potential challenge we could raise has been preemptively addressed. Every loophole has been closed. This is some of the most meticulous legal work I've seen in my career. So that's it. Rose said, her voice breaking, I just lose everything. 15 years of marriage, and I walk away with nothing. You don't walk away with nothing, Greg corrected. According to the separation agreement you retain your personal possessions, your vehicle, and a settlement of $50,000. That's actually fairly generous considering you violated the terms of your prenuptial agreement. $50,000, Rose repeated like Greg had just told her she was getting 50 cents. That's nothing. That's a joke. The house alone is worth. The house that your husband purchased before you were married and maintained the title on solely in his name? Greg interrupted. That house. You have no claim to it. Never did. It was never a marital asset. Rose's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I knew that look. That was the look of someone realizing that the world they thought they understood had been completely different all along. That was the look of someone who'd been playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. That was the look of someone who'd spent 15 years taking their spouse for granted and had just discovered there were consequences. What about the business? Rose tried desperately. I'm Richard's daughter. He's not going to let some stranger take over. Your husband sold his 49% stake to a charitable foundation, Greg said, pulling out another document. The sale was executed 2 months ago and filed with the state last week. It's done. Your father can choose to buy out the foundation if he wants, but that's between him and them. You have no standing in that negotiation. This is because of the toast, Rose said suddenly, like she'd just had a revelation. This is all because of one stupid toast at a party. He's ruining my life over a joke. Greg leaned forward, and when he spoke, his voice had an edge to it that probably made opposing counsel nervous in court. Rose, let me be very clear about something. Your husband didn't ruin your life. You did. He spent 2 years carefully documenting every instance of public disrespect. Every snide comment you made at dinner parties. Every eye roll in front of friends. Every little joke at his expense. He has witnesses. He has dates. He has a pattern of behavior that establishes this wasn't one isolated incident, but rather a long-term issue that culminated in that toast. He pushed a stack of papers toward her. This is just a fraction of the documentation. There are 17 separate incidents over the past 2 years where witnesses heard you mock your husband publicly, calling him boring at Janet's birthday party, telling your book club he was adequate in every way, emphasis on adequate, making jokes about his clothes, his job, his hobbies, his intelligence, all documented, all witnessed, all evidence that you created a hostile marriage environment. Rose stared at the stack of papers like they were written in a foreign language. People make jokes about their spouses all the time, she whispered. That's normal. That's what couples do. There's a difference between affectionate teasing and systematic degradation, Greg said. Your husband's lawyers will argue, successfully, I might add, that you crossed that line repeatedly, and then you nuked it from orbit with that toast. You gave them everything they needed. So what am I supposed to do now? Rose asked, and she sounded small. Defeated. Nothing like the confident woman who'd stood up at that party thinking she was so clever, so edgy, so brave. Greg closed the file with a finality that felt like a door slamming. You sign the separation agreement. You take your $50,000. You move on with your life. And Rose. He looked at her seriously. You learn from this. You learn that actions have consequences. You learn that the quiet guy you think is a pushover might just be someone who's taking notes. And you learn to read what you sign. Rose left Greg's office looking like she'd been hit by a truck, or maybe like she just realized she'd been driving toward a cliff for 15 years and had finally run out of road. Jennifer, the assistant, watched her stumble out with a knowing look that suggested she'd seen this exact scenario play out before with different names and faces. Greg sat at his desk, probably already billing for the time, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he was probably thinking what everyone thinks when they watch a spectacular self-destruction. Well, she really renovated herself right out of her marriage, didn't she? A week later, Richard drove up to my cabin. The man looked like he'd aged 10 years in 7 days, which honestly wasn't surprising considering his entire world had imploded faster than a Sioux Fall in an earthquake. His face had more lines than I remembered, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt instead of his usual business casual uniform, which told me more about his mental state than any conversation could. We didn't say much at first. I handed him a glass of rye whiskey. The good stuff, not the cheap crap. And we sat by the fire watching the flames dance while the silence stretched out between us like taffy. It was the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. Loaded with all the things we both knew but didn't want to say out loud yet. They blame me now, Richard said finally, his voice rough like he'd been gargling gravel. Rose and Eleanor. They're saying this is my fault. That I should have seen it coming. That I should have controlled you better. I snorted into my whiskey. Control? Richard, I wasn't a dog on a leash. I was the guy paying for the leash. Big difference. He chuckled despite himself a dry bitter sound that had no real humor in it. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that he took a long drink then stared into the fire. She really said that toast? I nodded word for word. Called me a loser who signs the checks but will never be her real lover in front of 80 people including you. Richard's face crumpled slightly, and I really looked ash white when I read that note. Like someone had opened a drain valve in your soul, I confirmed. We drank in silence after that. Richard left an hour later with guilt weighing him down like a backpack full of bricks. I stayed by the fire with peace settling over me like a warm blanket, watching the embers glow and feeling lighter than I had in 15 years. Weeks later, Rose received the final notice. Every asset, every title, every account had been legally transferred. She dropped into a chair, pale as skim milk, while her mother screeched in the background like a banshee who'd just discovered her favorite store was closing. Rose called me 17 times that day. 17. Each call went straight to voicemail, where they joined the other 100+ messages I'd been cheerfully ignoring. Her texts started coming in waves. We need to talk. This is ridiculous. It was just a joke. Please call me. You're being unreasonable. Each one more desperate than the last. Like she thought if she just found the right combination of words, she could undo 2 years of planning with a text message. My reply? Silence. Complete. Beautiful, deafening silence. Because sometimes the best punchline is knowing when to shut up. I sat in my truck outside the house one last time, watching through the fogged glass as the lights flickered on up. I sat in my truck outside the house one last time, watching through the fogged glass as the lights flickered on inside. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, probably Rose and her mother having another meltdown about their situation. No malice. No shouting. No dramatic violins playing a sad soundtrack. Just quiet closure. They wanted a toast? Well, here's mine. To the loser who signs the checks, but never again for you. Cheers.